Hey guys, Ghazzy TV here with another Path of Exile build guide video, and today we're going to talk about the pure Spectre build guide as of 3.24 Necropolis League. Now, as always with all of my build guides, there will be a written guide in the descriptions linked below. So do check that out if you're watching this video later, in case there are changes to the build, there might be PUB updates and whatnot. All of my guides will be updated before every league starts, so they will be readily available for every league moving forward. So as the written guide is housing all of the PUB information and whatnot, including stuff about where to get the Spectres, how to get them, how the build works, and Animate Guardian information and whatnot, let's just crack into the TLDR version here on the video. Essentially, I would not recommend playing the pure Spectre build guide as a low budget or a league starter. However, in the 3.24 Necropolis League, we have access to the Moon Dancer Spectres. These Moon Dancer Spectres allows you to actually play this from the very beginning, and later, once you have the availability to getting 4 Spectres, that is when you can start playing this build. The way you get 4 Spectres is to have the node on the tree called Death Attunement, as well as having a level 25 Race Spectre Gem. This is something you could get from having a level 21 Race Spectre Gem together with plus level of Race Spectres from either your Bones of Ur Unique Boots, very cheap by the way, level of gems from your weapon, which is 1 or 2, that's another 2 or 3 levels you can get, plus 1 from your shield, and then as well 1 or 2 levels from your helmet, to name a few. There's an option of getting a replica dragon amulet that gives up the level of Race Spectres to level 3 extra. However, it is better to use the unique Perkle Stow for damage output, and it also is a lot cheaper. Gear-wise and skill tree-wise, we're going to go through that real quick for you for the low-budget approach. We are going to be going in with the Ascendancy node of Mistress of Sacrifice. This is because the low-budget build will be using Bone Offering to give ourselves and our minions block-off chances. We'll also be running Command of Darkness for resistances to us and our minions, Manda's Aggression for damage and life, as well as the Bone Barrier to get ourselves some Leech. At the time of the recording, the current game is bugged with the Mastery Instant Leech, so therefore I would recommend not speccing into the Leech nodes and simply having the generic Leech, which is also bugged, so it's a less strength to it than it should be. Hopefully this will be fixed in the coming days. The tree, however, is going to be very generic. We are going for the tempering as enduring bond mods. We're going for sacrifice, spiritual command, aura reservation, as well as the redemption and righteous army on the left-hand side, gray pact at the bottom. And then we're just picking up block nodes and resistance nodes in the form of sanctuary. We're also picking up Eldritch Battery. Now, Eldritch Battery allows you to use a Divine Blessing aura setup. The problem with the Divine Blessing aura is that it's going to cost a lot of energy shield. Because of this, it's something you will take when your gear is supplying enough energy shield for this to work. Before that, just skip this aura setup. The other auras we'll be running is a Generosity Wrath, Petrified Blood, and Determination. Now, Petrified Blood, you don't have to be on low life all the time. You can use a life flask to get full HP. The purpose of this is to create a state of over-leeching. As our minions will leech consistently to us, we will always be covering ourselves from damage that's coming in. We'll have a Conductivity Curse, a Frost Blink, Convocation, faster attacks with Shield Charge, an Animate Guardian on a separate link, which you don't really need to use if you don't want to or feel comfortable with it, because the medium budget will not be able to use an Animate Guardian. The weapon will be a generic trigger weapon for Bone Offering and Desecrate. We'll have a Feeding Frenzy setup for Stone Golem and Race Zombie, which will not only act as buffing for our minions through making the enemy take elemental damage to the elemental army and giving them damage buffs to our minions through Feeding Frenzy, but also act as meat shields to cover you and make you safer. Links for the Spectres is very straightforward as well. We'll have Race Spectre, minion damage, Spell Echo, returning projectiles, pierce, and faster projectiles. For single target switch gems, you would then remove the faster projectile, the returning projectile for slower projectile. However, in the medium budget state, it would be better if you're able to get a white socket to make that change into a predator instead. Outside of that, it's very straightforward in general. The build is fantastic to play. There's projectiles everywhere, and it feels great. The downside, however, is that the Wretched Defilers are not really functioning very well on the lower end. That's why the recommendation is to only start playing with them when you have 4 Spectres, because you're going to be running 3 Wretched Defilers and 1 Spectral Leader. Spectral Leader is a buffing Spectre that provides you with 20% action speed buff, which is absolutely crazy, and that is when this build will start to actually function. Outside of that, another downside for this build is the fact that there are so many projectiles on the screen that visual clarity is very, very, very rough. That is why our medium budget will be focusing more on the defensive layers, such as sorting spell suppression, and with the combination of the Leech, once that has been fixed, the build will be very sturdy. I'm currently playing this on stream, actually, doing tier 16. I've been nibbling on tier 17s, and I have pretty bad gear, not even capped on spell suppression, and it feels very good to play. Pantheon-wise, for the low budget, we're going to be running the Brine King for freeze immunity and the Aberrath for the ignition, the reduction of duration of that. Outside of that, we are able to utilize the unique Jewel Unending Hunger, which will be very nice for clear speed purposes. But outside of that, the goal for the low budget build is to get block sorted and have life and resistance as capped, as well as sorting your attributes through your gear. For example, the Perkle's Toe provides a lot of dexterity, but you're going to need a bit more dexterity so that can go in other gear pieces. Again, keep track of your energy shield count to afford the Divine Blessing as you're progressing the gearing of this character. Gear-wise, like I mentioned before, weapon will be a trigger, preferably +2, but +1 is the cheaper one with a minion damage modifier and a trigger. Shield should have life, obviously, with a level of minion skills. The helmet should be running with life and plus level of minion skills if possible. And the chest piece in later stages will be a delve modifier chest, which gives plus extra spectre to go from 4 to 5 specters. But before that, in low budget, we're just looking for a corrupted 6 link to give you some life, resistances, or attributes, whatever you can get your hands on. Gloves will just be life and rest. Again, focus on energy shield basis to make sure the energy shield is covered. And again, as you can see in this PUB that I'm looking at right now, there will be changes made to this before the written guide will be posted, which should be available as the video gets released for you guys watching right now. Bones of Wool, great low budget state. The higher budget version will be using an Elder Influence boots to get that level of Spectre. Perkle's Toe, like I mentioned before, double bone rings with minion damage. Attack speed for them is very, very good. And obviously life for yourself. Darkness and Throne, and the jewels should be looking at either life together with minion damage when you've used the minion skill recently, or you're looking at using flat lightning damage. Rumish Concoction is a good approach. Unending Hunger, as mentioned, and there could be a possibility to have a jewel that gives you something like Taunt or Blind would be a good thing as well. When it comes to the medium budget, however, we're going to be changing things up a little bit. First and foremost, the tree gets a little alterations. We're going to move over for the Instinct. And we're also oiling the Inveterate for spell suppression. That's a little expensive, double black and a golden oil. And we're going to be using Lethe Shade. But first and foremost, I do want to point out a couple of things. This combination of Lethe Shade is only something you will have if you have jewels providing you with 100% shock immunity in combination with the actual Storm Shroud jewel. This allows you to be completely immune to elemental ailments, and therefore have no downside of Lethe Shade, which will actually be very beneficial for damage over time effects when you're running with Petrified Blood. Outside of that, I would just not take Lethe Shade until that is covered with a Storm Shroud Jewel. Our block nodes are no longer that important, as we're going Spell Suppression instead, but we're still keeping the Sanctuary node, and this is because of the combination of Green Nightmare, turning that into Spell Suppression, so we have an easier time to cap our Spell Suppression, which alleviates pressure on our the cost of our gear. Other than that, the tree is very similar. It's about the same approach. Same thing with the Leech. At the current time of the recording, it is bugged, so do not spec the Leech until they've fixed it. And that's about it. Item-wise, the other thing to mention here is that we will be indeed using a WRAITHLORD helmet. This prevents us from using non-Spectre minions, therefore the enemy Guardian and the Golem and the Zombies goes away at with the trade-off of us getting a ton of Spectres. This allows us to have 9 total Spectres. It's absolutely crazy. These 9 Spectres will be 8 Wretched Defilers and 1 Spectral Leader, as we doing the same thing with a low budget. Gear-wise, obviously a little bit higher numerical values on this budget. We're going to run a +2 weapon. We're going to make sure we have +1 on the shield. And we're going to be making sure that we have the Void Shock on at least 2 of our jewels to make sure that that's combined with the Lethe Shade. The rest of the jewels is the same, life and lightning damage. The chest piece will obviously be a plus number of Spectre at this point to get the 9. And we're also, if we can get spell suppression. This is something we can work around and have in different approaches. If you're not getting to the cap, you can always change the spell suppression mastery to the spell suppression. Spell damage is lucky to alleviate a lot of gear suppression so that it will be cheaper to get to the cap. Outside of that, the gloves will be spell suppression related as well with minion damage. We're going to use implicit from the Eldritch monsters. And same thing with the boots going into Raise Spectre from an Elder influence. Outside of that, we're going to run a higher numerical value on the Darkness and Throne, of course, and like I mentioned, Green Nightmare and Storm Shroud. Again, don't care about the shock immunity and storm shaft setup for Leech Shade until the very late stage of this progression. Skill-wise, the projectiles remain the same, except that we are now changing our faster projectile for lightning penetration. You can do this in the low budget as well. Both will work very well. I prefer the lightning pen myself, but it's a matter of personal preference. I will, however, say that I'm not changing my support gems at all when I'm doing endgame bosses, and it's working out perfectly fine. But it is for optimal for an optimal damage output, you would want to change the returning projectile for Predator in the higher endgame for Uber content. We are, however, going to be using a race Spectre of Transience. This is an alternative quality gem. The problem here is that the alternative quality will allow you to have more Spectres than your permanent Spectres. So I'm going to show you this in game. Essentially, what I have here is the build itself in action with 1 Spectral Leader and 8 Wretched Defilers. So if I show you in game that I am indeed only able to have 9 maximum raised Spectres, my transient gem, it can have a maximum of 12. So the way this works is very simple. If I were to summon with my transient Spectre, as you can see on the top left corner, I have 9, but if I summon a transient, I now have 10. Now I have 11, and now I have 12. You don't need to summon 3 of these. The only purpose this will have is to trigger Feeding Frenzy. So because it's only there to trigger Feeding Frenzy, you only need 1 of them to exist and hit the target, to slap it, to trigger the Feeding Frenzy buff. If I were to summon a 4th one, then it would replace one of my permanent Spectres, which you do not ever want to do. So as you're playing, the duration of these is lasting over a minute. So what you want to do is get 1 or 2 as you're playing, and every time you see that you only have 1 icon, just summon a new one. So that's how you do it. You have to be very careful to not oversummon it, or you will lose damage output when you're playing this. Outside of that, the setup is now a little bit different. Instead of Bone Offering, since we're moving away from the block, we're going to run Flesh Offering, which will give us speed as well as our minions. Outside of that, the generic setup is exactly the same as we had before, and now we're also making sure that the Divine Blessing is going to be there with Vol Haste. Cemetery was a test we did, and we're no longer going to be using that. And that really sums up the entirety of the medium budget in a TLDR fashion. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I am working on a high budget version. I'm doing this all live on stream, so do tune in there to check out the build in action. And yeah, like I mentioned before, check out the written guide in the descriptions below to make sure you have all of the information updated with the latest PUBs, which are currently being twisted and tested and tweaked for optimal performance. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more content. As always, stay safe, keep rocking.